once it became clear that the Ukrainians would hold Kyiv and actually move the Russians back from there and from Kharkiv and several other areas, it's pretty clear that this is a much more, I can't say evenly matched contest, but still a much more decisive contest that requires a lot more input from the West than was otherwise anticipated. And I think a lot of people made that mistake.
I'm joined now by the former intelligence officer in the US Air Force and a deputy director of warfare support at the Pentagon, Cedric Leighton. Good evening to you, Cedric.
Good evening, Kate. Good to be with you.
100 days of war in the country now. Give me your assessment of whether you envisaged this war lasting as long as it has.
Well, I definitely thought, Kate, that it would last for some time, but that was after the Ukrainians made their stand at Kyiv, and that I think was the big turning point. Along with many other analysts, just given the preponderance of forces, given the types of weaponry that the Russians had at their disposal, and all of the other things that are associated with assessing the balance of forces, it seemed as if the Ukrainian government would fall very quickly at the beginning of this. But what a lot of us failed to account for was the Ukrainians' fighting spirit and their ability to do things in a very innovative fashion when it came to defending their country. And I think, the previous guest had a very clear statement here. They're fighting for their land. And that's the key difference. And you compare that with Russian, frankly, ineptitude, that has changed everything from, an easy rollover to a completely different scenario. And once it became clear that the Ukrainians would hold Kyiv and actually move the Russians back from there and from Kharkiv and several other areas, it's pretty clear that this is a much more, I can't say evenly matched contest, but still a much more decisive contest that requires a lot more input from the West than was otherwise anticipated. And I think a lot of people made that mistake.
What have been the failings of the Russian military? A lack of discipline, a lack of organisation? Give us your assessment of how the Russian army has failed to some extent. We need to recognise, of course, that we've been told that 20% of Ukraine is under Russian military. But where have the Russian army failed?
So that's a really interesting question, especially given the fact that, like you said, Kate, that 20% of Ukrainian territory, by President Zelensky's own statements, is now under some degree of Russian control. The Russians have basically failed in terms of their organization and their ability to implement and carry out their operations. On paper, their military looks really good, really formidable, actually. But the reality of the situation is that their military culture is one in which they don't allow initiative to be exercised by people of lower ranks, whether it's a private on the front lines in the army or a sergeant. Their non-commissioned officer corps is in essence non-existent, at least not in the form that either in the US or the UK is very prevalent, where we give a lot of responsibility to our sergeants. And I think because of that, has become a major issue for the Russians. So they have failed in the sense that they have not been able to achieve the initial objectives as outlined by President Putin, which were clearly to take Kyiv, to eliminate Ukraine as a political entity off the map. But in this particular case, Ukraine is still a viable entity, at least for now. They have succeeded in secondary objectives, and they still maintain, I think, as long-term objectives, the idea of taking Ukraine off the map. So this is one of those where you can't let your foot off the gas situations in the West, especially because we do need to make sure that we continue to resupply the Ukrainians. But as far as Russian failures are concerned, I think that is it. That is the idea that they have not been able to fulfill the primary objective, at least not at this point.
And there is, of course, heavy military action in the Donbass region in the east of the country as well. We've also heard via US intelligence that President Putin has re-emerged after undergoing treatment in April for advanced cancer. That's what a US intelligence report says. We've also been told by US intelligence that there was an assassination attempt on Putin's life in March. Can I get your comment on both those reports?
Yeah, I think those are very interesting reports. I'm not sure. I realize it's from U.S. intelligence, but I do find it a bit hard to believe. In the videos that we've seen of Putin, he doesn't bear the hallmarks of any type of assassination attempt, at least one that was successful or nearly successful. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like he's behaving in that way. As far as the cancer treatment is concerned, I guess that's more of a possibility. I'm not a medical expert. However, I've obviously seen people who have suffered from cancer, and he also doesn't seem to be in that kind of a condition. So I'm skeptical
Mm.
that those
Are you
reports are
hearing
accurate.
anything at all, Cedric, in terms of Putin's health? Are you hearing any solid speculation?
Yeah, so I think it's always interesting, when it comes to Putin's health. The one thing I would say is I think there's a possibility of, some perhaps, an issue that might be similar to Parkinson's disease or, something affecting the nervous system. And I think that, when it comes to those kinds of things, the evidence that I look at is there's this one video where I believe he was with his defense minister and he was gripping the table and his foot was shaking in a very strange way. That would be one thing that was a few months ago. That would be one thing where I would say, yeah, there's definitely something medically wrong with him, at least not normal. But I'm not sure that it, gets into the realm of cancer or that it was an after effect of something else.
Mm.
But I think we need far more assessment on that. It is certainly possible that something happened, in his health history that would require further treatment. He, seems to be quite paranoid when it came to the pandemic. That paranoia is also translated into the security arrangements that he makes for himself. So those are the kinds of things that make it, I think, very difficult to assess for real whether or not he is suffering from something that would be quite serious and potentially life-threatening. But I don't see him being in that category yet, where he is lost his
Yeah.
senses or lost the capacity to govern.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us, Cedric Leighton, who is a former intelligence officer for the US Air Force and former Deputy Director of Warfare Support at the Pentagon. Thank you very much.